So good morning, good afternoon. It's right at one of those awkward times of the day, never real sure what to say. I'm Randy Hagan, and I lead the technical training for North America, as well as I'm part of the knowledge transfer group. Welcome to our session today. And just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping here before we turn it over to the experts. We are using Zoom for those of you that have not used Zoom before. We're recording this session for those that want to maybe use it at a later date and such. But also there's a Q&A button on your screen. That Q&A button is your means to ask questions. You can go ahead and type in your questions if you have questions for Jim and Rachel, and they'll answer those as we go through the session today. There is a chat box. If you're having issues or anything, you can send us a quick note to the panelists and we can try to address those for you. And then also there is an audio button on your screen that you should be able to adjust if you are not hearing us as clearly as you need to. With that, I'm going to our presenters today and experts are Jim Donnelly and also Rachel. Rachel, my brain just went dead. Willis. Good grief. I'm sorry. Anyway, Rachel Willis as well, both agronomists. And we've also got Allie White, who is going to be asking some of the questions that you've sent in to this group already. And so with that, Allie, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of set the stage for this and get the ball rolling.
All righty, welcome everybody. I'm coming to you from behind the camera. I will be moderating the session today. I would like to give Rachel and Jim an opportunity to introduce themselves. So take it away, Jim.
All right, so I'm Jim Donnelly, technical agronomist for DeKalb and Asgrow in Northern Illinois. Been in this role for about 7 years, and my territory is roughly kind of Interstate 80, I guess, Lee County, Bureau County, or Lee County, Whiteside County, all the way up to Wisconsin and all the way across. So that's my rough geography. I'll turn it over to Rachel Willis so she can introduce herself.
Yep. So thanks, Jim. I'm Rachel Willis. I'm also a technical agronomist for DeKalb and Asgrow in Northern Illinois. And kind of where Jim described, I pick up south of Jim and kind of pick up Bureau County and then move south down to, roughly 74-34-ish line there.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Well, thank you, everybody that submitted questions to us on Twitter and Facebook. Let's start with one of those while we wait for some of these to roll in over the Zoom call. So we had a few questions, timely questions now around planting and thinking about the current conditions we have right now. So Jim, this next week looks like we're going to run into some cooler temperatures with maybe a potential risk for frost. If it dries up and it gets fit, should we plant ahead of that extended cold period?
Thanks, Allie. So that's a common question that occurs every year, and it seems like we run into that all the time, and there's some different circumstances that occur every year that make them a little bit different. But it's definitely a question that we always get. I would say that first of all, what moisture we've had has been welcome. So we've definitely haven't had an overabundance of moisture coming into the spring. But, we're looking at least the forecast that I looked at here just recently. We've got some potential rainfall, in pretty good amounts here coming up this weekend. Last time I looked, it was over an inch. So, regardless of what the weather is going to be like next week, this rainfall that we get this coming weekend could put us out for a few days, regardless of whether whether we want to plant or not. If for some reason we weren't able to get that much rain, which we kind of missed out on a little bit this past event, so it's entirely possible that we won't get that much again this time. what do we do if our forecasted high is only about 52 and, we're going to get lows into the mid 30s. So when you think about it, obviously, if it were to dry out and we were able to get in the field come middle of next week or even early next week, it's not like we would have corn up in a week. It would actually probably take 2 to 3 weeks or whatever at those temperatures for corn to even come up. So what we've learned really over the past many years, unfortunately, we've had those conditions fairly often the last few years in Northern Illinois. What we've learned is, corn can actually tolerate those conditions pretty well, but it's not necessarily getting them up out of the ground that we're concerned with either. So getting it up out of the ground is one thing, but then what's the quality of stand once it does come up? And then what are the implications that occur because of corn sitting in really cold, wet soils going forward? And what we've learned is that, corn, when it's emerging, and Rachel knows this very well, and she can probably touch a little bit on, what can happen when we have that. When we have seedlings that sit in cold, wet, saturated soils for a few weeks, that can be a prime condition for developing things like crown rot later on in the season. So, when I think about it, it's a case where, if it were to dry up, we certainly could. But I don't know that corn would be my first choice to put in the ground ahead of a nice cold, wet spell, especially if it's forecasted to be extended. When we look at putting beans in the ground, what we've learned over the past few years on that, it certainly seems like, those have the ability to tolerate those conditions, especially with the treatments that we've had, a little bit more than corn. And, the potential long-term implications that those conditions can have on an emerging corn crop, might lead us to think a little bit longer or a little bit more on that. Now, I would say sorry, you just want to jump in, don't you? I would say once we get to the middle of next week, it's going to be a constant, look at the forecast again, because if we see the forecast after that, hey man, it's going to be up back into the mid 70s and conditions are drying out, then obviously you go. But at this point in time, it looks like it's going to be a nice cool down, and we might want to hold off a little bit. Rachel.
Yeah. So thanks, Jim. I when I think about this, whether or not I should plant, especially in relation to corn, I kind of think about what I gain from that. So do I need that extra time? Do I need that extra couple days having that in the ground to make things work out for my operation logistically? Because to Jim's point, my concern would probably be what happens to that corn crop later. So are we setting ourselves up for other things like a lower stand, lower population, crown rot, seedling disease, etc. So if you can, every operation probably is a little bit different, but that's one of my biggest concerns. I mean, the other thing is goes back to kind of fundamental, go out and check your soil temps and see where they're really at. I've just gotten in the habit of checking them every morning. Kind of either before or after I get on the road, I check my soil temps at a couple different spots just to see where they're at, how much they've dropped as our overall air temperatures start to cool off.
So we talked a lot about corn. There's a question that came in around planting soybeans earlier and seed treatment. So the question is, should I be thinking about doing something different with my seed treatment if I'm planting earlier this year?
Yeah, so I think that, whether we're talking about corn or soy, I kind of think about especially as we're going to plant earlier, think about the history of the field you're going into. So on soy, if you're going into a field that has a history of SDS, you certainly want to be using a seed treatment product that's labeled for control and suppression of SDS, like Olivo or Salter or whatever you have that is labeled to reduce that severity later on in the season. So you certainly want to make sure that you have a high quality seed treatment on there, especially as you plant earlier, and especially as you think about those fields with a history of SDS.
Awesome. So let's switch gears here. We had a few questions come in around tar spot, and this is definitely the group to ask those questions to. So here's one that asks, did my fall tillage last year help reduce my risk of tar spot for this year?
They just said they lost audio.
Okay.
Sorry. Allie sent a message to me. I think she meant to send it to everybody. She said she'll be right back.
So folks, bear with us. We'll be back here in a quick second.
All right, can you guys hear us? We're back.
Yes.
Well, yeah. All right, thanks, Randy.
Thanks, Randy. So I think the question was on tar spot. Why don't you repeat it just in case?
Yeah, just to make sure everybody heard that one. We had some questions around tar spot, and somebody was wondering if their fall tillage from last year is going to help them reduce their risk of tar spot for this year.
Okay. So in general, when we start talking management of foliar diseases, you know, tillage and residue management is definitely at the top of the list when it comes to, you know, trying and reduce the amount of disease for the following year. All that inoculum resides on residue, and it's generally good practice to bury that and allow that inoculum, the disease there, to decay. One thing that we've seen is that there really hasn't been a correlation to, you know, chisel plowing or aggressively managing tillage when it comes to tar spot. And in fact, a lot of our cases of very heavy disease have come after rotation, and sometimes rotating to 2 other crops since it's been corn. So, you know, unfortunately, and you know, not to say that I still won't recommend residue management, but unfortunately, there hasn't really been that direct correlation to, you know, reducing disease and tillage. I think part of it has to do with, or a lot of it has to do with the proper environment, and also the fact that much of our germplasm in the U.S. is susceptible to it. So it doesn't really take much to get it going, whether that's coming from your field or your neighbors or, you know, wherever down the road. You know, certainly wouldn't discourage someone from, you know, doing a little bit more residue management, but I don't think that that's the silver bullet by any means when it comes to reducing tar spot.
No, I think, you know, a few years ago, tar spot was really very isolated to Jim's territory in far northern Illinois. And last year it was basically in every cornfield that I walked into. And so that area where we're finding it is really kind of expanding a little bit. And so there's a lot more interest in managing it. And to Jim's point, you can kind of go through and manage a lot of different ways. You can manage your residue. But I do think that the very best tool that we have right now is using a fungicide application when you start to see that.
Yeah, and when I think of other examples when it comes to, you know, reducing residue and trying to manage diseases, when you think back like 10 years ago plus, and we had a lot more Goss's wilt in the area, and that really started to get heavy. You know, Goss's wilt is another one that we still recommend. You know, residue management, increased tillage to help bury that residue and you know, diminish the disease. But at the same time, if you have genetics that are susceptible enough, it just takes a little bit to make a big problem. So even though you're able to reduce the disease quite a bit, you know, it doesn't take much to get it back going again. So again, would still recommend it, but certainly not the silver bullet by any means.
Great advice, you two. Moving into a question on bean leaf beetles. So thank you, Matthew, for submitting that question. The question is, bean leaf beetles were bad last fall in some areas. Are they going to be a problem in those same areas this spring?
You want me to answer that? I mean, I think the answer is maybe. I don't know. You know, the good thing is early spring we have that we have insecticide seed treatment that really does help us with the bean leaf beetles early. Last year, you know, in parts of my territory, bean leaf beetles were really bad in the fall, like you said, and I don't think that's a common occurrence. I haven't seen them that bad in probably ever in my experience.
Yeah,
my short experience.
You know, one thing I would say is there's some pretty smart entomologists that have been around for a long time, and they still can't tell you whether bean leaf beetles are going to be bad or not. You know, I would just say and preface it by saying that I think the potential is there for increased bean leaf beetle, especially over last year. You know, early planting beans also, you think about it, we fix some things, but we also can create problems elsewhere. And early planting beans can also provide that host for those overwintering beetles to come to your field to feed on. All right. So if we're early planting beans, those can actually be a food source for those beetles that just got done overwintering. Okay. You know, thankfully, like Rachel mentioned, we have seed applied insecticides that work very, very well when it comes to bean leaf beetle. You know, we tested those many moons ago, and they work awesome. I think there's been a little bit of skimming back on insecticide use on seed treatment sometimes, especially over the last few years where the farm economy's kind of gone down and we're looking at you know, picking and choosing a little bit more on which treatments to use. And to some extent, there was a little bit of waning on insecticide use on beans. And I think that combination of early planting with that lack of insecticide allowed some of those populations to build. So I guess my recommendation would be, especially in areas that may have had you know, heavy bean leaf beetles this past fall, to absolutely be using that insecticide, not take it out, and use that insecticide on that seed treatment, especially if you're planting early. And if they're already treated and you don't have it on there, then I would be looking, once the beans come up, looking for bean leaf beetle feeding, and you know, be prepared to do a early season insecticide application. So biggest thing is, like you mentioned before, get out in your fields and scout early on and be looking.
Thanks, guys. So sticking with the same theme here on insect pressure, we've got another question for you. We polled our Twitter followers and we asked them what their biggest concern for their corn crop would be in 2021. And the most answers were corn rootworm. So should we expect more rootworm pressure this year? Jim, what are your thoughts on that?
So back to the comment about entomologists not really knowing. I think it's up in the air at this point, just like anything. And rootworm in particular is pretty hard to judge. I mentioned bean leaf beetles before, but there's actually some pretty decent formulas looking at overwintering temperatures to judge survivability on that. But for corn rootworm, it's pretty darn hard. You got to remember where they're overwintering at and in what stage. And when you look at corn rootworm, they're overwintering in an egg stage, so they're pretty protected. They're overwintering in the soil, and you know, thankfully for them, they're insulated pretty well from those harsh winter temperatures because they're buried in the soil. In addition, when you look at the northern Illinois
Folks, bear with us. We've got a little audio again. We'll get that corrected here in a minute.
So I think that that's my cue that I give too long of answers. So sorry about that. We keep getting cut off on our audio. But I guess where I was going from a rootworm standpoint is when we look at this past winter in Northern Illinois, you know, we had some pretty cold temperatures, but all those cold temperatures occurred with at least a foot of snow on the ground in most areas. So if you were to take a temperature probe at the level that those corn rootworm eggs were laid, that it would have been pretty mild. And in some cases, you know, if it got to freezing, it was just below. And those are nice toasty temperatures for corn rootworm. And honestly, they were probably pretty comfortable. So, you know, to me, that's one stage of it. The next stage is, you know, what's going to happen when they're hatching at about, you know, end of May, first part of June. So, you know, really that's one of the most susceptible times for corn rootworm, more so than the overwintering. So if we get saturated conditions at that end of May, early part of June, that's bad news for the rootworm. If not, if it tends to be pretty dry, that tends to be ideal conditions for corn rootworm. So, you know, if we see our year's going to be warm and dry, then my bet is going to be increased rootworm pressure, especially in those areas that had it bad last year. Do you have anything to add for further south?
Well, so my comment would be sort of like what I said with tar spot, actually, where it feels like historically it's kind of been Jim's territory, but as we move further south, tar spot has become more prevalent. Last summer, I saw a lot more rootworm beetles. You know, I went in at Tassel and they were kind of felt like they were everywhere, which I don't normally see in that geography as much. And so I understand why there's really that concern that, you know, and I think on a broader scale about rootworm. So, you know, to Jim's point, if we get rain at the right time, that can kind of save us. But right now we can't ever really count on rain at the right time, right? So we need to make sure that we're setting ourselves up to manage those to the best of our ability, making sure, you know, I think I love talking about corn, but in this case, rotation really is a very good idea. You know, so I feel like I need to make sure that I always put a plug in there for rotation. I think that's the biggest thing that we can really, one of the biggest things that we can do to manage it right now, instead of just relying on a time of rain, because we all know that unfortunately doesn't always come.
Yeah, and I think if you're in Northern Illinois and you've grown corn for several years in a row, you have to assume that you have a decent level of corn rootworm pressure there. So make sure that you're scouting, regardless of whether you have traits or whatever your management was last year. You need to be out digging come late June and July and seeing what kind of pressure you have there.
Okay, to build on to that one, guys, we have a question from the audience here, and someone asked, we are due for corn rootworm to move into our area. Should we be planting more smart stacks traded corn?
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, short answer, yes. A little bit longer answer, again, think about all the tools that you can use. So much like disease management, insect management, I feel like is really building on different strategies. So use rotation if that fits in with your operation, and then use smart stacks technology to help you manage those as well.
Yeah, and I think it does depend on the rotation that's in question. So if it's corn on corn, you know, the answer is an automatic yes, and probably should be occurring already. If you're talking rotation, there are some areas of the state, especially to the east and northeast, that have had variant corn rootworm pressure, and that's where they western corn rootworm lay eggs in the beans, essentially in anticipation for the corn the next year. And over the past few years, we've been able to get away with not having to use rootworm traded corn in those rotated acres, because the pressure's been so low and they haven't been laying eggs in the beans that we've been totally fine. But our observations are, especially this past year, that especially as you go to the eastern side of the state, we're seeing more western corn rootworm beetles and activity in soybeans the year prior. So not to say that you absolutely need to have smart stacks there, but there are more cases that I think we need to be utilizing traits following beans where we haven't had to do it in the past. So once again, please be out, if you don't have numbers from the past year, please be out this year in your beans doing traps, taking observations to know what you really need to do the following year. Because I know that there's going to be areas on that side of the state that may wish that they had, 12 months from now. That's a good question.
Thanks, Jim. Here's one more follow-up with that in that same topic. So what's your opinion on using soil applied insecticides on double pro traded corn?
So I don't know if you want to handle this, but I know it varies. So once again, where we're utilizing double pros, it tends to be on rotated ground, so after being stubble. And the idea there is that we don't need any rootworm control tactic whatsoever in those situations. If we were to do double pro and insecticide, then that kind of negates the whole point of removing the rootworm trait out of it, right? So unless there's some huge advantage to the double pro version from a genetic standpoint, our recommendation is if you're going to put insecticide on the double pro, then you might as well have it built in and run smart stacks there. So if an individual likes the genetics and wants to run double pro but doesn't feel comfortable without the insecticide, then that's fine. But generally that cost negates the whole point of going to double pro. You have anything to add on that?
No, I think, I think what Jim's saying is the economics don't really add up there when you think about smart stacks versus double pro plus insecticide. In a previous role, I did a lot of root digs, and we had a lot of insecticide, double pro with insecticide versus smart stacks. And what I've seen is that smart stacks provides more reliable control for us. So there's cases where insecticide works very well under pressure, but if you don't get enough water or you get too much water, again back to those timely rainfalls, it's just a little bit more variable. And so I feel like when you really need that rootworm control, the smart stacks provides a more consistent control.
All right, thanks guys. Switching gears here, we had another question come in. They asked, a lot of ammonia went on this fall, but some went on in the spring. How soon can I plant into that?
Is that mine or yours?
We can tag team, I guess.
Okay, go ahead.
So, generally I say about a week, give it 7 days. Thinking about the rainfall, especially where I live a little bit further south, we really got quite a bit of rain. And as I was driving around late last week and early this week, I saw a lot of that anhydrous go on. And so I think by the time it's fit, we don't want to be mudding anything in. So by the time it's fit, we're probably in a good spot to not have to worry about that anhydrous.
Yeah, I'd agree. We got a decent amount of fall ammonia on up north, and generally that's of no concern. And from a safety standpoint, you have to understand what makes it safe. So when guys are applying ammonia, they're applying it in a gas form. That's the most caustic. That's what causes the damage. It takes a little bit of moisture to convert all that to ammonium, and ammonium is safe. Ammonium is stable. And that week's time that Rachel's referred to is is just allowing enough time for moisture to convert that ammonia gas over to ammonium. So around here, I think the spring applications finished up, basically last week. I think there's a little bit going here, but with the rain that we've had and the rain that we're going to get, and the period that we're going to be out, I think, for the most part, most of the applications are going to be safe by the time we get there. But like Rachel mentioned, just give it that 7 days if you're still applying ammonia before you plant, just to provide that safety.
Thanks, guys, and thank you everybody for the questions. Keep those questions coming in the Q&A. We have one that this grower is thinking about their weed management strategy, and they ask, if I've been planting beans around mid-May and I'm looking at planting them mid-April, do I need to change anything about my weed management strategy?
So I can start this one. So, Jim referred to early planting as, fixing one thing and maybe making a little bit of trouble for ourselves in another way. And I think he's talking about bean leaf beetles there. But we do need to manage early plantings a little bit differently. But fundamentally, I don't think that our strategy really changes. Now, how we execute that strategy might change a little bit, kind of depending on the year. But, the strategy is really don't let your weeds come up. So, start clean, you want to keep it clean and don't let anything come up. So how we actually achieve that, unfortunately, it's kind of a wishy-washy answer because it probably is a little bit based on the weather and the year. But in some cases, we might need another post application, so kind of a second post pass in some cases to make sure that we're keeping those weeds from emerging if we aren't to canopy at the appropriate time yet. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, not really. I think one thing we have to think about is the earlier you go, the potentially the longer you have of a herbicide having to do a job, and you could potentially have time run out on that first applied herbicide. And that kind of goes back to our early spray guarantee, right? By utilizing the residual, coming back in with within 30 days with dicamba and warrant, or something similar. And then especially with XtendFlex, being able to utilize that liberty later on if we do have that second flush of weeds. But by and large, that first good shot of pre with that early spray of XtendiMax and warrant, tends to do a really good job.
All right, Jim, I've got another one coming for you here. This grower sounds concerned maybe about white mold. They say, I've struggled with white mold in the past. What are some management tactics to use there?
Yeah, so not much has changed really from a white mold standpoint. Really, it still is about starting off with genetics. Making sure you've got soybeans with good white mold ratings. And I know that's something on the Asgrow side, I think we've done a really good job over the years of selecting stuff that's certainly better on white mold, as well as some of the other diseases. But it starts there, and then, to some extent it's there's like cultural control tactics that you have to look at. So, going to 30-inch rows, that will help air movement to some degree. It's not a silver bullet by any means. And then from there, it's kind of a timing on weather, to be honest. So, planting early beans also gets canopy earlier and can create those more favorable conditions at that R1 time frame. One thing that Bayer has done, we've done some fungicide spray trials specifically targeting white mold, and we've looked at several different genetics from looking at sprays by tolerance level. And one thing that we've seen with respect to the Delaro applications is by doing a R1 followed by an R3 application of Delaro, that has a very good effect on white mold suppression. So my recommendation in Northern Illinois is one, to plant a variety that's pretty tolerant. Two, though, is, basically our standard recommendation is to do an R3 application of Delaro. That's becoming more and more commonplace, and we've seen the yield benefits there too. But if we get to about R1, so first flower, and we've got cooler, wetter conditions, and conditions that are right for white mold, then I'm probably going to recommend an additional application at that R1 period. So bank on the R3 application, but then if conditions are right around flowering, hit it prior to that at that time, and I think you'll see a marked decrease in white mold. My fellow pathologist here, I mean, we're both disease nerds, so I'm sure she's got something to add here. But is there anything else on white mold
No,
that's a tricky one?
It is a tricky one. I do think that so much of it depends on having those ideal conditions at the time of infection, which is R1. So, to emphasize what Jim said, that R3 is the perfect time for fungicide, insecticide under, in a regular field where we have that white mold concern. We want to hit it that R1 plus R3.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, guys. So back to our conversation on pest management, and Rachel, you kind of dipped your toe into it, thinking about adding insecticide in the tank there. But we had somebody ask, when it comes to fungicide on corn and beans, how important is it to have insecticide in the tank?
So thanks for that question. So I just said, I think that especially on soybeans that we have quite a bit of data over the years where we really see the kind of an additive benefit of the fungicide plus insecticide. So to me, if I'm gonna do the fungicide on beans, I'm certainly gonna do the insecticide on there as well. On corn, I think that it's probably a little bit more based on the year, on the conditions, what you're seeing in the field, where at that BT time for your fungicide application in corn, the fungicide is the most important part. I know that especially as we get into higher rootworm areas, sometimes we want to throw that insecticide in to control beetles. It's not always the perfect timing. So unfortunately, when we need to be putting on a fungicide, we may not be doing the most effective timing for control of adult rootworm beetles. Do you want to comment? Jim's the expert on the rootworms, but any other comment on that?
I'm glad you went there, because I was gonna add that too. That I think adult management for corn rootworm is very important. I think we're missing the boat to some degree on these heavy fields where we're just letting all the adults mate and lay eggs as they see fit, and I think we're missing a great opportunity to help reduce the population there. But I think there's a lot of people that are trying to do the right thing by adding an insecticide to the fungicide tank, to the fungicide application to get those rootworm beetles. The problem is that's not correlating very well with the peak of the emergence of the beetles. So we may be getting a little bit on the front end, but we're missing so many beyond that, and the residuals don't last long enough to hit those, that I think we lull ourselves into a false sense of security that we put an insecticide out in the tank and we got them taken care of. They emerge so much later than that, and we're just missing them. So I'm not sure that it really needs to be thrown in with a fungicide automatically, so much as making sure it's targeted, or a different application of insecticide is targeted.
Great advice. Thank you, too. So let's take it back to another one of our Twitter polls. So we asked our followers, what do you want to hear more about to increase your corn yield? And the number one answer was corn was population. So what are you guys' thoughts around corn populations and really utilizing them to drive yield?
I think this is your baby.
Yeah, I like to plant my corn big. So, one of the reasons that I feel like I'm probably always trying to push people to the higher end of where they're comfortable on population is that we really have a lot of data to show us that our corn responds very well to those higher populations. We also have the agronomics to really handle those higher populations. So again, in a previous role, one of my jobs was to really help facilitate those population trials that we do. We do a lot of trials looking at different populations to really come up with very good, accurate population curves. And so I think that that's really one of the ways that you can increase yield by just pushing that population a little bit more. We have a nice tool online on DeKalb.com. You go up to tools, and then you can pull up your population optimization tool, I think is what it's called there. And you can put in different hybrids. You can kind of mess around with your seed cost. You can mess around a little bit with your yield environment, so you can get a very accurate population suggestion there based on your your real situation. I think that one thing that you'll see if you kind of play around with that tool a little bit is that if you're just going out and planting every single hybrid in every field at the exact same population, you're possibly planting some things too thick, but also planting some things too thin, and not really optimizing yield and economics there by just having that single static population that you use on everything. Anything you want to add that I missed?
Not really. That was perfect. I think that can lead into a whole longer discussion about seed scripting and all that, and variable rate corn planting and where it pays and where it doesn't. But that's probably a discussion for another time.
Yeah, I will say, last year I used that seed scripting a little bit, and it's I'm a little bit of a corn nerd, but it's pretty interesting and fun using that, especially when you have a really variable field. You can really play around with that tool, and it's really pretty easy as well.
So Rachel, since you just admitted you're such a corn nerd, our listeners are
we're a blast at party.
Our listeners are curious, what products should they be looking out for that they'll see in Plus this spring that you guys are really excited about?
Awesome question.
That is a really good question. So if you guys have heard me talk, I like really full season corn also. So I want to plant my corn thick, and I want to plant a full season corn. So there's a new one, 6584, a 115-day Smart Stacks product that I'm really excited about. It looks like it has a little bit of stress tolerance. It has nice grain quality, very good stalks and roots. To me, it kind of just feels like a little bit of an upgrade on some of our full season corn that we have right now with even more yield and that really good agronomics. Do you want me to give you a turn to talk about corn?
No, you're fine.
So the other one that I'll mention is a 112-day hybrid 6269. That's a Smart Stacks, and then we also have a double pro version of it, 6270. So that one is going to be in plots this year. And again, just a real nice upgrade on yield, but very good solid agronomics in that 112 RM that I'm pretty excited to see what that one can do for us also.
So there's also corn earlier than 110.
Sub 110.
So yeah. I'll chime in on that. So we do have a new 107, 107 day that looks really good. A little bit shorter stature, plant type, excellent yield potential. One thing that I'm excited about some of these new launches is the root strength on these. So it's no secret this past year we had plenty of wind events, and certainly tested some hybrids, and that can be a good thing, because when we start looking at new products, new launches, we can kind of select for things that might be staying a little better. And all three of the products that we talked about so far are both rated a 1 and 2 for roots, and from a DeKalb rating standpoint, those are the best. So really excited to showcase the roots on those three new products that we mentioned. We do have a new 100-day Smart Stacks and Double Pro that I'm also looking forward to. Corn actually gets that early, Rachel. Looking forward to highlighting those a little bit too. But yeah, the new 107, new 112, and new 115 both look excellent, and we can't wait to get them in the ground and get a good look at them.
So how about on the soybean end, guys? Which varieties are you most excited about that we should expect to see in plots this year?
Okay, so again, Jim and I will probably have slightly different answers based on our end here. I also like to push my beans late, but one that I'm really excited about that maybe will overlap a little bit here on is 31XF2. So that one, again, you know, we talked about very good roots on our corn hybrids. Our new beans, one of the things that I noticed was they had very good ratings on standability. That one is going to have excellent standability. Just tremendous yield potential.
Rated a 1.
It's rated a 1. You can't get better than
That's
that.
right.
Yeah. Overall, I also noticed that our breeders did a nice job of compiling good disease packages for us on all of our new launches. So as a disease nerd as well, I was happy to see all of the disease ratings there, because we like to talk about good genetic resistance for our soybeans. So I think the number one bean that I'm excited about is that 31XF2 for next year.
Yeah, and we've at least on the Group 2 side, we've got a new 2.8 with really good agronomics as well. So kind of back to the white mold discussion, good ratings on white mold as well as SDS. And frankly, we've got a few returning numbers there: 24XF1, 25XF1, 26XF1, and 27XF1. All 4 of those have a good spot. But had really good performance this past year. So we're going to be bringing those again. We were very happy with them this past year. So we're going to be bringing them again along with some of these new additions. And that Extend Flex lineup keeps getting stronger.
Thanks, guys. So we talked about a lot about corn rootworm earlier, and that's generated some questions around SmartStax Pro. People are wondering, will we see SmartStax Pro in any plots this year?
Yep, so there'll be an opportunity to get some hands-on with SmartStax Pro. We have some internal strip trials that we're doing. Our TDR organization is doing those. Those are targeting some pretty good pressure, and also trying to put those in locations that we can get to and look at. The TAs such as Rachel and myself also will have a small amount of SmartStax Pro to look at. And really just get some practice on doing some root digs and looking at evaluations on how they're compared to older traits on the market. So short answer is, yep, we're going to have those in plots and should be at enough sites that anybody can get a handle on, and hoping for a limited launch here in 2022. Anything? I mean, you're going to have them down your way as well.
Yep. I'll have a few in my territory as well. And you know, I mentioned earlier, I in the previous role I did a lot of root digs, and so I'm kind of looking forward to having those as a really good option to go through and look at your different traits there and really evaluate the rootworm efficacy.
And all those root digs were in the coolest days of the year, correct?
Yeah, and there wasn't any pollen floating around either. Yep.
So speaking of new technology, guys, we've had a few questions on short corn. So Rachel, talk to us a little bit about short corn. What are the benefits and when will it be on the market?
Yeah, so kind of mid-decade is the time frame for a launch there. Short corn, there's a couple different things, a couple different approaches you can take to looking at the advantages there. First of all, the standability on it is going to be improved. So we just have a nicer, shorter stature. It gives us really good, strong stalks there. So we have improved stalk strength, improved green snap tolerance on that short corn. But the in-season access is also another really exciting part of short corn. So Jim and I have talked a little bit about fungicide here. And I know that in some cases we have to rely on somebody else to put on those fungicide applications. So if we can get in with our standard equipment and put on that fungicide when we need it, where we need it, that's really going to give us a nice benefit. So I think that the in-season access, the improved standability, those are two of the most exciting parts for me. Jim, do you want to talk any about that?
I think the sky's the limit on what, you know, subtracting 5 feet from a corn plant can change. Really, it kind of opens up a huge fun conversation actually. But you know, I was thinking, we were talking about spraying, even just you know, if a guy is doing, you know, a Hagie application of fungicide that he normally does in tall corn, where you have tassels flying in your face all day long, I mean, that gets old. And, you know, just taking that out, you know, that it even applicator fatigue, you know, it's not a big deal, but it certainly is something that will be a lot easier for those guys to spray. But just things like nitrogen management, you know, the implications that has, overall disease management, you know, having less of a canopy, you know, may affect disease management in a positive way. You know, there's some things like weed management that may have to change too. We're not really sure where that's going, but I think overall it's going to be a lot of positives that I'm looking forward to dabbling with. So, did you talk about time frame at all?
Did you mention that? I said mid-decade. Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we had another question roll in. This person is wondering, is Chrome the same as Smart Stack? Which one is better for corn on corn?
Jim, do you want to talk about Chrome?
So Chrome is a competitor trait that essentially uses the same, you know, actual traits in basically a different package. So, you know, I think, you know, grower experience has been varied with that. You know, one thing that we've noticed though, at least in Northern Illinois, that, you know, regardless of the trait, you know, heavy pressure has really played a pretty big role, you know, negative role in root feeding. You know, one thing I'll say is as you get into Central Illinois, it certainly seems like, you know, grower experiences that have had Chrome and Smart Stacks in the same field have definitely had better experiences with Smart Stacks in those situations. So I don't know if you have any individual comparisons that you've been a part of, but I know my counterparts in the central part of the state have definitely had a lot of good side-by-side comparisons that really touts the advantage in the control. Granted, they're the same traits, but definitely better control is what they're seeing with Smart Stacks over the Chrome trait.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you, guys. And we are coming to the end of our list on questions here. So let's maybe answer one more and get back to the basics on this one and talk a little bit about planting depth. What do you guys recommend as an ideal planting depth?
So a little bit tongue in cheek here, but wherever you think you should be, maybe go just one notch deeper. You know, I say that kind of jokingly, but I feel like when I've seen planting depth be a detriment, it's because it's been too shallow. So it's not very often that I look at something and say like, oh, we shouldn't have planted that so deep. It's always the other way around. It just seems like planting too shallow gets us in more trouble than planting just a little bit deep.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, that tends to be my recommendation, and my experience is that a little bit deeper tends to be a little bit better than a little bit too shallow. You know, to some degree, it depends on the year and what's occurred prior. You know, if especially in Northern Illinois, if you're coming into the end of April and it's been cold for a while, and all of a sudden you get a nice warm spell, you know, the top 2 inches may be warm, but you don't have a lot of reserve heat underneath. You know, in those situations, you may not want to bury it too much. You kind of want to be careful with that. Whereas if it's been warm and you have some reserve heat underneath, then that can be a little bit more forgiving. But you know, by and large, you want to make sure that you get that at least 1.5 inches, but preferably 2+ inches deep.
All righty, thanks you two. Our time together has come to an end. Thank you all for tuning in and for helping us celebrate Agronomy Week.
Thanks
All
for
right.
joining.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Hope you found it helpful and useful, and maybe we'll do it again someday.
Thanks, everybody, and have a safe spring. Bye-bye.